talk for a little while he's setting up. It's great to see everybody here. My name is Scott Smallwood. I am the director of the Sound Studies Institute. I'm actually on sabbatical this year, but I stepped in tonight for a number of reasons. First of all, I just wanted to say oh, there we go. I knew that was going to happen. Yes, I told you this is a grand experiment. Okay, maybe if I mute myself. No.
The sound studies are already happening.
So we'll do this.
Oh, okay, that works.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Wow, this is great. This is a great turnout. There are a few more chairs over there. I'm sorry, we didn't have quite time to get them all out, but please help yourself if you can. So anyway, as I was saying, our interim director, Marilyn Oliver, there's also 2 seats up here. Please don't be shy. Come on up here. Marilyn Oliver, the interim director of Sound Studies, unfortunately was not able to make it tonight. So I'm stepping in for her as the normal director who's supposed to be on leave, but I'm also here really excited because I was going to be here anyway. So I'm going to introduce this person over here in just a moment. But I first just want to say, just for all of those who are coming in from the outside, the Sound Studies Institute is in Amesquatchie-Waskahegan, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations people on Treaty 6 in Canada. And we're really happy to be here and welcome you all, whether you're here in person or whether you're online. And I just also want to say this is a really exciting moment for me personally, because when I started the directorship 3 years ago, I had a lot of ambitions to start a new gallery for sound right over there. And unfortunately, something happened that prevented me from doing that. And it was called a global pandemic, which I know everybody is really tired of hearing about that. So anyway, the point of that is that we weren't able to realize that dream. And then I stepped away to go on sabbatical, and Marilyn Oliver stepped in my place. And I just want to thank her so much for shepherding the gallery, which is now open. And we're really, really excited. I think this is going to be our 3rd exhibition.
Number 1 right there.
Yes, the birding by ear. If you didn't get a chance to see that, we're hoping to have a few pieces kind of cycle through that have been in the gallery before. But Yvonne Mullock's piece was our very first exhibition in the gallery. And that was followed by an exhibition of student pieces, which was a collaboration between art and design and music. We're really excited about that. And I actually think the playlist is still on the door over there. And then finally, Stephan Moore is here to be presenting. No, it's okay. I need this to be presenting to us tonight. And I'm really, really happy to welcome him to be, I guess, our 2nd artist in resident here at Sound Studies. Stephan Moore is a longtime collaborator of mine. He's a composer and a sound artist, received his PhD from Brown University. I think I have his bio memorized. Stephan was a member of the Merce Cunningham Dance Company as the sound engineer and sometime composer and music director of that dance company for many years. He has many wonderful stories from that time of his life, working with Merce and many other people in New York City. Stephan is now an associate professor of teaching at Northwestern University in instruction. Yes, same thing. Yeah, a few more syllables. At Northwestern University in the Department of Radio and Film. Radio, television, and film. Stephan is also one of my best friends and one of my longtime collaborators. As I mentioned, we met years and years ago. I won't tell you what the date was, but way back in Baltimore. And then again, we got to live in the same town for quite a few years, and we entered into a collaboration together. So Stephan is here not only as a solo artist in resident, and his piece will be on display, in quotes, in the room next door for the next month or so. Stephan is also here to join me in a performance with the Jen Mesh Dance Conspiracy, and Jen Mesh is right here next weekend, where there are 3 performances happening at Mile Zero Dance in their new space. And we will be emailing the Sound Studies list about this. So if you're on the list, you'll receive this. If you're not, go to soundstudies.ca and join the list. And some of you will hear this by other means as well. Stephan is also here because he worked with me on a really exciting couple of pieces, or a piece that's part of the Know Thyself as a virtual reality exhibition in the Fab Gallery. That's a mouthful. Over in Fine Arts. And so if you haven't seen that show, and more importantly, if you've never been in virtual reality before, I highly recommend checking out the show. There are 7 pieces in that gallery. Many artists here have pieces. Stephan and I have a piece with Marilyn that we're really excited about. It's called My Data Body. There's a bunch of pieces. They're all great. So I think there are probably other reasons that he's here too, besides just visiting and doing all kinds of fun and interesting projects. But tonight he's going to talk primarily about the piece he's been working on in the gallery, and also some general artist talk kinds of things. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Stephan.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, I'll get right on to the other artists. The other artists sorts of things. Do I turn this on? Is that work? Am I going to get myself? I'm not going to get myself through the thing. It doesn't work that way. Okay. Tom is okay, got it. Tom is on the call and will be jumping in if anything starts to go horribly wrong. I've given him license to just flag this whole operation down and stop it, so that we make sure that the folks who are joining in virtually also get everything that's happening. So if all of a sudden a strange voice comes in and seems to start speaking to me, it's just Tom. Yeah, we should be all set to go. I think if I share my screen and then share the sound from that screen and then go over to this screen and hit the play button. Okay, now things are happening. All right, well, thank you, Scott, for that great introduction, and also for shouting out all of the things. I had a list written down to shout out all the various shows and things, but yes, please come see the show at Mile Zero next week. Please go to the Fab Gallery and check that show out, and please spend some time in the gallery over here. This show will be up through March 29th. I'm sure there are hours posted around here somewhere. This is primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, and there was a conversation had in my presence recently about all the things you can do wrong if you're giving an artist talk. So I'm going to try not to do any of the list of things I heard. I'm not going to try and talk about my entire history of all of my work, and I'm not going to leave no time for question and answer. So I'm going to try and get through a few ideas and hopefully some fun stuff to look at fairly quickly, and then leave some time for discussion, and then it'll be great to meet those of you I have not already met, although I've met a bunch of you, which is great. It's been a great couple of weeks here in Edmonton so far. All right, so the piece that I've just spent the last couple of weeks putting together, which is opening today in the gallery, is called Caldera. It comes out of a load of ideas. I'm not going to really unpack the title. It's one of those titles that's meant to just kind of hang out in your head as you experience the piece that's happening in there. But what I can say about it is that it brings together 3 of sort of my favorite kinds of ways of working, or materials that I like to work with. One of those is using ready-made sound objects, and I have a few examples of that I'm going to demonstrate. It uses generative compositional techniques, meaning, and nowadays the word generative is getting this weird rap because every other article in the New York Times is about AI or is written by AI or something. But it's this idea that a computer algorithm can generate material. I'm not using AI per se. It's pretty unintelligent what I'm doing. But it's a set of rules and systems that from which kind of musical experience emerges, and which you can kind of tweak and change to get different kinds of things to happen. So I want to talk a little bit about how that works and demonstrate it a little bit, and then also spatial audio, the idea of using multiple speakers in a space to be able to create a sense of another space you might be in, or a sense of being surrounded by sound, and sort of all the different ways that that can work. And so I'll talk a little bit about how that works in this piece, and I'll also talk a little bit about some of the other experiences I have going on with that, and that should be plenty to talk about. So jumping in right away, here's a piece I made. I'm just going to show a little bit of documentation, a piece that I made with my friend Peter back in 2016, and it's been shown in a number of configurations. This is actually documentation from the first showing, and a bunch of things have sort of evolved and changed about the piece, as will happen when you show a piece multiple times. And it's a big kind of unwieldy installation. But this piece is called Chorus for Untrained Operator. And the idea of this piece is that there is an old-fashioned switchboard. It's a 1941 Western Electric. I traced it down. It used to be part of a Macy's in Connecticut at one point in its life. And my friend Tom Holmes grabbed it from an estate sale. I woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there was a message at 5 saying, "Hey, there's this really cool thing at this estate sale. Do you want it? It's like $250. And then it was a message at 6:15 saying, I really think you're going to want this. And then a message at 7 o'clock saying, I'm just putting it in my garage. You can come pick it up. And then I woke up and saw the whole thing had happened. So I was all of a sudden the owner of this switchboard. And so I spent some time trying to figure out how to wire it up and how to work with it. And it turns out that the insides of a switchboard like that are made to handle enormous voltages and are able to connect a lot of different types of power and electrical signals just by switching, or by putting in the plugs into the different holes. And so Peter and I started figuring out ways to use this switchboard to control kind of a large orchestra of ready-made objects. And these were either things we just found in a thrift store, like an old vacuum cleaner that had a particularly good noise, or a sewing machine, or an oscillating fan that we could maybe connect to some other things. Or maybe they would be objects that would be a little constructed, built out of 2 or 3 other objects. And so as this sort of orchestra grew, we came up with this idea of allowing the visitor to the gallery to have control over these objects and be able to turn them on and off from this kind of interesting, also ready-made interface that we had discovered and repurposed. And this idea of repurposing kind of became central to this piece and to a lot of other work that I've done using objects that are not necessarily musical instruments, but using them in musical ways. So here, I'll just go ahead and play this video and then talk a little bit more about what's going on. You'll be able to hear something. Nope, that's not happening. Oops.
Yeah.
Is that the situation?
Well, it is already turned out.
Yeah. Maybe. Let's see here. We had this working beautifully earlier. Sound is definitely being shared. The sound is coming out. Let's see if that makes a difference. There it is. So we were thinking a lot about sort of the materials of each of the objects in here. We're even thinking about that gold colored lamp cable that is sort of run to all of the objects everywhere. Reminded me of the cable that connected my grandmother's lamps to the power outlets in her house, and it sort of had everything had this kind of aged feeling, or this feeling of these objects that had mostly been found in thrift stores and in charity stores, and seemed to have the best years of their lives as objects behind them. And here we were sort of going to pick them up and take them on a journey into a different career as a musical artist in a piece like this, and participating in this kind of an installation. So and I'm also just really interested in the textures of these sounds, and how often sounds result from useful objects that are useful in other ways, that are actually very beautiful, and we don't often give ourselves a real space to sit and contemplate and listen to those sounds. So a piece like this is an opportunity to do that. Another piece, and I'll warn, this is a very funny set of images because it involves a very young Scott Smallwood and a very young me from a few years ago. And here we are doing a performance of a piece called Loudspeakers. This is kind of an edited down version of the piece. The full performance would have taken around half an hour or so, and this condenses it into just a few minutes. But it would always begin with these oscillating fans, and then quickly we start to add other sorts of objects to the fans, allowing them to interact with them. Or maybe you can see here I'm putting a zip tie on this one, which will allow it to sort of become a percussionist and play another object, but also which makes it a little bit off kilter in terms of where its weight is centered. So it also starts to make it vibrate and perhaps move around and have a little bit of a different. We also have little microphones and cameras around the table. You can see there is video projected in the background, which is from these cameras. And gradually over time, everything becomes a little more dense and built up. A lot of trust invested in these objects too. We sort of set them up and then kind of let them do their thing. And occasionally bad things happen, and just kind of let that happen. But it's good to wear thick sole shoes. I think that's the core of a humidifier, that thing that has the bottle on it. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to interrupt this video, and I think you get the idea. But the entire thing in its thrilling conclusion is available on YouTube, as well as a video of a version of this piece that we performed here in Edmonton many years ago. At this point now, wow, many. So the last thing along this line I want to mention is just to give a real concrete example. I went to your antique mall here with Scott in town, and I really fell in love with this rotary cheese grater. Just listen to it. It really wants to sing. It's sort of done with cheese. Cheese feels really secondary to the use of this object at this point. I thought maybe this would be a good opportunity, since this is one of the objects that I based a portion of the installation off of, to sort of talk not just about this use of sounds from ready-made objects, but also a little bit about the generative audio component of things. So I'm gonna get out of here. I think I can do this thing where I bring over, this is the programming language Max, which some of you may have seen or worked with before. I'm going to try and do this tricky thing where I'm looking at a screen over there, but using my mouse, which is going to be great. What could go wrong? I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. But this is, and this is where I'm going to rely on Tom to tell me that the sound is indeed coming through. No, I don't think that's coming through. I think I have to switch one thing. You won't hear it just yet until I turn this up. But Zoom audio device as my output. Oh yeah, here we go. We're good. Okay, thanks, Tom. So this is a recording that we made, and this is just, it's about a minute and a half long loop of Scott and I down in the beautiful new recording facilities that are still coming online here in this building. So yeah, so that's the basis for one of the sections of the piece that we're that you'll hear in there, but you probably won't recognize that sound exactly, because what I'm doing with it is transforming it and changing it around in a bunch of ways. So there's a lot of things you can do to make a sound like that kind of more interesting. I'm going to take it down to a quarter speed. That's all this means here. Just play at 25% speed. Turns out a lot of sounds sound a lot better if you slow them down, especially metal things with a lot of harmonics and other partials. All right, so you get the idea. So what I've got here, all this code that's kind of stacked up and not connected to anything right now, is a means of trying to control the speed of this playback in a more creative way. So in other words, not playing it just at a single speed, at full speed, at a quarter speed, but playing it at kind of a constantly variable speed and trying to give that a bit of description on how I want to do it. So I decided to, maybe we'll take just the first part of this. This is a sine wave. And this creates a signal that moves back and forth in a sine wave shape between 1 and -1, which would be full speed and reverse full speed. And if I were to just connect this directly, see if I take this off. Oh yeah, coding at this angle is really fun. And oop, no, wrong way. I want to do, just connect this directly to that. It's like almost like I'm scratching it like a record. I'm going forward and then backward. You're sort of hearing that moment where I turn, where it turns around from backward to forward. If I take the output of that, make the variation a little smaller, and then offset it, I can kind of visualize this. If this is the speed control that you were just listening to, multiplying that by a quarter would mean just a smaller variation in speed, slow speed, but still going backwards to forwards. And then offsetting it by adding 0.4 to it now means that we're varying the speed, but the speed is always going to be forward. It's just slower or faster. But that variation is still really fast. And if we just connect this directly to here, we'll hear something That's a little more interesting. So it's like I've got a speed control and it's turning it up and down. So that's a little, still not quite interesting. It sounds a little goofy or cartoony maybe. But then I've got this other part up here that is allowing me to slowly change the rate at which the sine wave is advancing. So it's no longer happening at 1 hertz, at one of those cycles per second. It's going to happen a lot more slowly. And you start to see changes in speed that are a little more like this. They're kind of, this section up here is just allowing kind of a random signal to really sort of slowly change and control how all of this goes. So now, if I connect that signal to here, we're hearing changes in speed that are kind of more like this. And because it's a random change that's happening, very quickly, I can't predict what's going to happen next. I can't predict what's going to be happening. And this is where a system is generative, in my thought, is that I've given it a range of parameters over which things could possibly happen, but then I'm letting a lot of the minute decision-making be up to the code and the kind of pseudo-random number generators that are inside the computer. If I, let's see here, I'm going to make a little change over here. We can do that. And I'm going to send, these are MIDI note codes. This is basically a C major 7 chord. That's a C, an E, and a G, and a B flat. So I've gone over here. I have a retune object, which is basically a auto-tuning device. Everybody is aware of auto-tuning from listening to the radio, I'm sure. So I'm taking this as a voice. It's kind of in the vocal range. It kind of works that way. And I'm retuning it so that now it will sing just in that chord. So this object will be listening and retuning those voices so that now it's a little hard to tell, but it is being locked into this chord, and it's a little easier to tell. I'm just going to delete this for a second. I'm going to, let's see here, connect this to a reverb unit. Oh, that's pretty lame. Let's see, these are the parameters for the reverb I wanted to use. Oh, hello. I know what's going on up here. Stop that. Yeah, okay, nice. Great, time sounds wonderful. Sounds like it's happening somewhere down the hall. I think this 100 goes here, and the 120 goes here, and the 80 goes to both of these. There it goes. So now I have this voice that's kind of singing into this cathedral-like space, and it's locked to this chord. So it's kind of got this musical quality to it. And it doesn't really sound like this anymore, although this is the source of all of these sounds. And then what's really nice is up here, I'll turn this down. I've got the same thing happening 8 times, once for each of the 8 speakers that's around that room. So all of a sudden, we go from having this single voice in this cathedral-like space to having a whole ensemble that's surrounding you from different directions. And as all of these things fall out of sync, as the speed difference changes, they all end up sort of singing in different ranges. Some end up using a very low register of the voice, if you want to think of it that way, and some are singing higher. But there's this sort of random distribution of these voices happening kind of all over the place. And because it's a sine wave, probably most of the pitches are somewhere in the middle of the pitch range, and there's some outliers towards the bottom and the top, which actually ends up just statistically sounding kind of great. So yeah, I always like showing a little bit of this code because I feel like, you know, we talk in these kind of more arty and conceptual terms sometimes about what's going on with the piece, but sometimes it's really interesting just to sort of dig into like what are the actual nuts and bolts of how to create generative behaviors. And so this is one that you can hear in the piece. Now the piece has a total of 7 different vignettes that are in it. So this one with the cheese grater is just one of them, and you may or may not be able to guess the source of some of the other ones. It's not really meant to be that kind of a game, but what the space does allow for, with the really nice speakers that are in there and the really beautiful microphones that are here in the studio that Scott and I used to make these recordings this week, is the ability to get really highly detailed, high resolution, sort of close-up kinds of recordings that then allow you to, when you slow them down and when you start to alter them, you can get incredible amounts of detail out of them. Something like reverb, like I'm using here, does tend to sort of smooth over some of the details of the sound, but there are plenty of other things where I leave the sound very dry and very crispy, so you can hear in great detail what's happening. So yeah, that's anyway, that's a little demo of how this kind of audio, this approach to generative audio works. I haven't really stopped to ask if there's any questions yet. Maybe I should do that. Yeah.
When did the generative audio appear on the map?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really depends on what you mean, or kind of at what level you're thinking about it. One of the first people to use the term generative audio was Brian Eno. And there's a piece on Music for Airports, his early ambient album, the second track, where there's a bunch of vocal samples of a voice just sustaining a pitch that are all being played back at different lengths. It's maybe 15 different loops, and all of those loops were allowed to play at their own speed. And so sometimes they come in, you know, together. Sometimes every note is showing up at its own period, and as a result, there's this amazing process that feels very much like kind of an evolving musical feeling, but it's really just this very strict procedure that's happening. The answer that some folks will give you about that is there's a musical game that is actually attributed to Mozart that involves, and I'm forgetting the exact title of it, but it involves short segments of music that you were meant to sort of put together while rolling a dice. And so that's kind of a generative process. And then you would, after scrambling all of these elements according to what the dice told you to do, then you would play through the piece, and there's your generative music. So it's an idea that's definitely not new and definitely not just related to sort of technological uses. And that word generative, I'm bracing myself for the amount of abuse it's going to get with ChatGPT and everything else that's going on, because that's sort of be setting a different tone on what it means to be generative. I might have to find a new word eventually, just to sort of like feel like I'm distinguishing myself from that kind of work. Because there's nothing in my system that is relying on a large underlying database of knowledge that is being looked up and used to create novel results. The novel results are just happening as a result of very simple systems. But yeah, it's a great question. Yeah.
Have you heard Cage's harpsichord album?
I have.
Yeah, the bass, treble, balance, and volume.
Yes, specific to the album. I've actually been involved in a live performance of Harpsichord that took place in Chicago like 3 minutes before the pandemic started, at the end of February 2020.
So where does the hands manipulation, how does that relate to what you're like? Simple or
Yeah, I forget how exactly. So this is specific to the record of Harpsichord. Yeah, so because the performance piece itself has a lot of sort of very wild, indeterminate aspects to it. Harpsichord on the record, there's an additional set of instructions that you go through as the listener to set the various controls on your home stereo system into some random situation.
10 seconds, either quarter, 0, quarter, half, 3/4, full. The bass treble volume.
And how are you? Is it dice, or how are you doing it?
Yeah, you have to have a stopwatch, and you need 2 people because you need 4 hands, but.
But is it a score he gives you, or does he give you instructions for how to generate the score?
Well, you just play the record at a certain volume, and then there's a chart that says, the chart that comes with the album, it says, every 10 second intervals.
Okay.
And then it tells you what setting in order.
So guaranteed when Cage created that score to be included with the album, he was using chance operations and a set of procedures that we could call generative procedures to create that score. But then when you're recreating it at home, there's nothing generative about that process. You're just a musician following instructions. I don't mean to denigrate that idea at all, but that's more how that works.
Okay,
yeah.
So that's a 30 group of what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I think this idea shows up in a lot of places. For Cage and for Merce Cunningham, when you see indeterminate aspects showing up, you see it as it normally has to do with their curiosity about what could happen. Sometimes you hear them talk about removing taste from the equation, which that idea has gotten a lot of abuse, and rightfully so, I think, because taste is still embedded in the range of decisions that the situation is allowed to have. But I think of it as a way of surprising myself with the work. It's one thing when composing a work to know when you want each thing to happen and exactly how you want it to happen. It's a very different way to say there's kind of a range of things that would be interesting if they happen, but if I allow the system to make decisions, surprising things will come at me out of the system. And that's I think the part that I'm kind of more excited about. And that's often, I think, how I've heard Cage and Cunningham talk about their use of that. Yeah, it's a deep topic for sure. And anybody who's been following all of the ChatGPT stuff also knows that some very surprising things can happen when you start talking to a chatbot as well. Maybe not things that were intended to happen necessarily. So the last part of what I have here that I just want to mention is the spatial audio aspect. This piece uses what we would call octaphonic audio, an 8-channel ring of speakers. I forgot where I got this graphic from, but I kind of love this picture. We have a system like this here in the gallery. There's also a system like this that Scott has over in Fab. And I think there will be a system like this installed at DC3 Gallery later this month for a piece that Scott is working on with Cindy Baker. I think a lot, when I think about sound and creating sound works, I think a lot about the portability of those works and how if you want to make something that people are going to be able to listen to in other situations, you pretty much have to make it in stereo most of the time. Stereo is what all of our systems do by default, how we have a pair of headphones, a pair of speakers. Even here we have a pair of speakers, although there is, I'm so glad to see a pair in the back for quad. That's nice. Yay. We must be in a place where they think about sound. And to have 8 speakers is a real luxury. But over time, as these kinds of systems have become easier and easier to make, and more people have had access to them, and compositionally, there's been a lot more work done in this octaphonic format. And so this is something that I think about as, maybe we're approaching a point where we can think of this as another quasi-standard way of working with sound. So a couple of things I'll sort of say about spatial audio. Beyond that, it's a real luxury. It's a real wonderful thing to be able to have 8 speakers and 8 high-quality speakers like this to work with. Here's another 8-channel sound system. You see 2 of the speakers there, and the other ones are kind of positioned around this circular wall. This is a piece that Scott and I created a few years ago and have brought now 3 times to the Burning Man Festival. That's the Black Rock Desert in Nevada there. I think the sun is rising at that point, if I'm orienting myself correctly towards the mountains. And so there's some folks who are here kind of camping out, but the buried piece over on the side is a subwoofer. And what you're looking at here is a scene where this piece, which we called unpopular music, as maybe a way of contrasting the style of music we were playing to some of the music that's played in the 74,000 other music venues that are at Burning Man, putting this sound system way out in the city, way far away from all the other really loud sound systems, and allowing kind of a space for quieter listening and quieter spatial listening. So this is the piece there. I also did a version of the piece in Chicago. These photos are really low res. Wow, how'd that happen? And so yeah, this is in the summertime. This is in Jackson Park. That's a yeah, this is right by the sort of Japanese Gardens portion of Jackson Park in Chicago. We have a playlist of well over 100 compositions that we've collected from different composers around the world that we're able to play back in this kind of a system, and allow concerts of this music to happen in places that aren't normal concert hall kinds of situations, which is interesting to me, thinking about the portability of this kind of sound, taking it to other places. You'll notice that the speakers that are used in this system are a little different. This is a set of speakers that I've been working with for the last, gosh, it's well over 20 years at this point. Scott has also been involved in a lot of use of these speakers. I'm not going to go into a whole history of how they came about, but it's the idea that the speakers that we use themselves, not just stereo or octaphonic or some strange configuration that you dream up because it suits the particular idea that you want to do, but also that the speaker themselves, the speakers' bodies themselves, and the way that speakers behave is something that doesn't get called into question very often. Most of our speakers have a very standard kind of 45-degree dispersion angle. You put them in a certain place, and then you have to sit in a certain way in relationship to them to be in the sweet spot of what the sound of the speakers is asking you to do. And with these speakers, we're doing a lot more of an imitation of the behavior of acoustic sound sources. If I were to clap my hands right now, that sound would go out kind of in a sphere. It would interact with my body. It would interact with the walls and the ceiling and the floor. And it would sort of fill the space in a very different way than a recording of a clap coming out of the speaker would, which would really be kind of beaming out in a particular direction. That sound wouldn't necessarily travel backwards from the speaker until it had bounced back from the front and was filling back into the room this way. So thinking about different ways of introducing sound into spaces. In the example I was just showing here, having a Hemisphere speaker like this that has that wider dispersion angle and putting it up against the baffle of these walls allows for an 8-channel and sort of octophonic, 8-directional projection of sound that is really, I'm going to use the horrible word, immersive in this kind of a space. And it's being really conducive to reproducing octophonic mixes. So I'm just showing a couple of pictures of the speakers here. I still make these, I still use these. One of the things I'm doing with them right now is a very non-traditional configuration of these speakers, not an octophonic system, but a 16-channel system. It's with an organization that I founded with a few friends in Chicago called the Chicago Laboratory for Electro-Acoustic Theater, or CLEAT. And the graphic there kind of gives an idea of what the layout of the speakers is. They're attached to the ceiling, and there's 16 of them spread out in this sort of a 4x4 grid situation. This gives you kind of a picture of the speakers laid out in the room. So we've had those speakers installed in this space called Elastic Arts. It's a wonderful experimental music space in Chicago. It's been our partner in this since late 2019. We had our inaugural concert in January 2020 and a great follow-up concert in February 2020, and then we took a break. And so we've just now, for the last year, starting I think in January of 22, we've started to do regular monthly concerts again using the system and making the system available to other artists who come into the space. Very crucially for me, Elastic Arts is a space that exists outside of the university, outside of the Ivory Tower in general, and works a lot with musicians and creators who are coming from a multitude of different communities and different perspectives. And so by having the system in this space and by encouraging folks to use it, we are hopefully making these kinds of tools and these sorts of ideas about spatial audio available to a group of folks who normally wouldn't get a chance to do it. And sometimes to people who have been spending time in academic institutions and then when they graduate no longer have access to these kinds of systems as well. So it turns out that when you make this kind of a system available to a bunch of people, all of a sudden, a bunch of really interesting ideas come out of the woodwork. And so we run regular training sessions in how to use the system with various software tools that people might already be familiar with. And yeah, so this is something that is ongoing. If you're in Chicago, please come see one of our shows. We're usually the second Friday of every month. And if you have an idea for what to do with this kind of a sound system, I hope that wasn't a person falling over. Is everybody okay? Please come and join us there. So yeah, spatial audio, ready-made sound objects and voices of sort of normal objects made weird. Generative audio, that's probably good. I'll call it quits. Thank you for listening. I hope you get a chance to enjoy the piece. And if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Just a second, myself. Turn this down. All right, thanks. Oh, no, I didn't turn it down enough. We could play. No, we better not. Okay, and actually, I think you're still sharing your screen.
Oh yeah, let me stop doing that.
And I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't have to worry about getting questions online because we're just streaming out, but I just wanted them to see my smiling face. Okay.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Stephan? Please just jump right in.
In one of your performances, I saw that the glass jar broke and there was an unexpected positive surprise. Did you try to replicate it in your future performances, in breaking the jar?
Oh yeah. I mean, when you're working with glass and sort of unruly mechanical devices, that actually ended up happening a lot to us. We were usually sweeping up glass shards at the end of several performances. I think the most dramatic one I remember is that we had found a toilet paper holder, and we had a fan kind of tied to this toilet paper holder. So it was but it was sitting on the table, so it was kind of hanging up at a weird angle. This was either Cincinnati or it was one of those shows back in that early tour we were doing this. But we with the fan up there, some string got wrapped around the fan, and the fan pulled this object in, and then the string snapped and the object kept going and landed on the power strip switch and turned the power off to the entire system, and that was the end of the night. I mean, sort of it just called its own ending. It's pretty amazing.
And I mean, I think just to answer that further, we never tried to break anything, but we didn't prevent breaking from happening. It was kind of about setting up the drama, and then whatever sonic results from that came.
It's a lot of fun, it turns out, to set something up where it's pretty clearly going to eventually walk itself off the table and smash, and then just turn your back on it like you're completely ignoring it, and then just watch the audience be like, it sets up a kind of a nice dynamic. So, but yeah, I mean, definitely I feel a certain amount of great catharsis when things smash. And then we have to go back to the thrift store and buy more things. So, other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, your process for arranging when you're writing in octophonic. You give examples of what would it be, one track or one speaker?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've done it in different ways, but maybe speaking about this one, you write, okay, this is one, and then I'm going to figure out two, and then see how they work together, and then add three, and then see how they work together, and then or are you kind of, anyways, but just if you maybe
yeah. So there's so many ways to kind of conceive of how that sort of a system works. Is it each speaker is really its own voice? Is it one coherent system and you're able to work out some really sophisticated algorithm for panning things around, moving them from speaker to speaker in a way that makes the space seem kind of fluid and almost like the speakers aren't there? Are you going to think about it as a pair of quad systems that are sort of interlaced but not connected to each other? There's so many ways to sort of go at it, and I pretty much with each of the 7 kind of vignettes that this piece moves through, I was working with this idea of each speaker kind of being a multiple. That you kind of come up with the behavior of one thing, and then you have 8 of those things happening. There's one of the vignettes where I actually put a total of 4 times 8, 32 things happening, where I put 4 copies of one thing in each speaker and then kind of let them all play out. There's the one more sparse section that's in there. In our trip to the antique mall, we found a beautiful metal dish that's an 8-sided octagonal dish. And so Scott was playing it. Scott's a much more experienced percussionist than I am, so was playing this with his hand and getting sounds out of each one of the 8 sides. And then I was very scrupulous to keep the sounds from each of the 8 sides separate in the 8 speakers, so it's almost a reproduction of the dish itself. So that's maybe the one place where there is definitely different material in each speaker happening. Otherwise, each speaker is really just being treated as its own kind of thing. So with the cheese grater example, that same cheese grater sound is used in all 8 speakers and then is just being played through that generative system that yields different results in each one. So this sort of chorus of different things comes out. Some of the other things, I did a bunch of recordings with an oscillating fan, a zip tie, and a metal bowl. It's very similar to some of the stuff you saw on the last Bruce video, where when that, I think I made 20 or 25 different recordings that are all of different lengths and then are all going to be played back at slightly different speeds from each other. But each one of the speakers kind of, when it's done playing a sound, goes back to the library of possible sounds, sees which sounds aren't currently being played and which ones are currently accessible to take, will randomly select one of those sounds and start playing it. And then we'll play that through, and when it's finished, we'll go back to the library and see what's available and sort of check in the thing it just finished playing and check out the next thing. And so creating a little kind of librarian piece of code that manages which of the files is being played is part of that. So in that situation, there would be different materials in each speaker, but what materials go to which speaker really has to do with just the sort of the circumstances. And as the piece unfolds over time, anything could sort of show up anywhere. So yeah, that's really the approach I'm using in this piece. There's a kind of a trope Scott and I will laugh about sometimes when we're listening to a lot of the octophonic music we listen to, where it's like everybody at some point in time has to roll the marble around the room. There's just like, the sound of the marble rolling and it rolls around the speaker system. Like, yes, I can do this.
It's really cool.
It's one of those things I can't really bag on it, because it is pretty cool to make it happen and to make it happen convincingly. But that would be an example of using the whole system kind of more as one continuous space. So yeah, in this situation, I'm not doing that, but I wouldn't say that's a rule across like everything I do.
If there are no questions, I have a quick question. What's the craziest that you have gotten with the Max patch?
Well, this is kind of funny.
This is a small one.
Yeah.
It has a couple that are about twice this size. Printouts of the back patches.
It just so happens I was part of a gallery show here in Edmonton a while back, and it was kind of wonderful to have these printouts, these beautiful prints produced of some of the Max patches, because I find them visually beautiful just in their own right. And so I wanted to kind of, there's also a lot of the texture of how the code looks that has to do usually with how fast I'm working to try and make things happen. If a piece of code looks really, really nice and really groomed, it means I had too much time to make it. But if something looks really like, somebody just, was nailing down shingles in a windstorm kind of thing, then that's also reflected in the code. And some of those larger patches I've had turned into these prints. I think the craziest one may actually be documented over in the electronic music lab in Fab. I worked with this musical group called Animal Collective. They were doing a show at the Guggenheim in New York, and they approached me to say, we're going to have a 36-channel speaker system using the entire inside of the Guggenheim with 4 subwoofers on the floor. And we have all these sound materials, and we need to make these sort of 3-hour performances where these sound materials are going to be used randomly. And we just need somebody to kind of sort that out and figure out the spatial aspect of it and all these things. And I said, cool, when is this? They're like, it's in 2 weeks. I was like, cool, so I'm not sleeping. And I think I was hallucinating just from lack of sleep 2 parts of making that patch. And when I look at it now, I still am a little bit like, I get the sweats. But the patch ended up looking really great. And somehow I had to sit there and babysit it through the entirety of the day that this piece was shown, because I was very nervous it was going to crash. It didn't ever actually crash. I'm very proud, but I sat there just like with like my eyes glued to it for the entire day. And they had this beautiful, enormous monitor. And so after just kind of spending all this time looking at it, and people coming by who were seeing the piece, sort of noticing where I was sitting and kind of looking at the code and being like, what's that? And stuff. That's where I sort of first had the idea to try and do prints of some of these patches. So that one is huge. It's like 5 feet tall, and it's sitting over in Fab, a copy of it. And it also ended up getting used as the sort of a poster insert in the album, the vinyl version of the album when they released it. It was like a limited release record store day thing back in 2010 or 11, whenever I made it. A very different version of Max with a very different kind of aesthetic to it. Max keeps evolving. Now it's very curvy and warm. It used to not be so curvy and warm.
Questions?
Yes.
Do you compose without chance operations?
Trying to think of the last time I did that. I mean, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. Or sometimes I'll use chance operations to make something fixed that then kind of remains. Sometimes I also will do improvisation. Scott and I do a lot of improvisational work, and we will kind of, after we're done improvising, we'll listen to our improvisations and edit everything together, kind of selecting the best bits and constructing a fixed piece out of the results of that improvisatory work. And actually, one of the pieces, the big piece that the Gen Mesh Dance Conspiracy is dancing to at the Mile Zero shows next week, which I get to plug again because of your question, thank you, is a piece that was done in that way. So it was released as an album. You can listen to it online on Bandcamp, and every time you listen to it, it's the same. So and by the time it reached that stage, it is more or less a fixed composition. But it's certainly not the kind of thing where I said, okay, now there's going to be a C sharp, which goes to a D, and that's going to be in this harmony. And you know, there was none of that kind of thinking that ended up in there. I feel like I did a lot of that very early in my composing career, and I didn't really enjoy it. And there are so many people who are really good at it and do a great job of that kind of thing. And I think I just prefer to let them do that. And so then it frees me up to do other things that are more interesting to me personally. Yeah.
Okay,
I feel like there's donuts and coffee.
Yeah, so
and
I'm gonna say there are donuts, we're gluten-free and non, but not for everybody. So, and I didn't know so many people show up. This is great. So I'm gonna try to work my way over there in a second and cut them, and you can help yourself. There's also some coffee, and we can warm up some water for tea. We have a few things. So
share the
feel-
donuts.
feel
Spread the
free to-
donut love around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I do want to say, I hope I'm doing this right. I think the next Sound Studies event actually is the Women of Folkways event, which is our signature annual
This Saturday night.
concert this
Yeah.
Saturday, featuring Mallory Chipman, Audrey Akoa, Shima Robinson, aka Gwenevin, and Dana Wiley will be performing. And as usual, that concert features four contemporary women folk artists who are both covering music that is important to them from the Folkways catalog, as well as creating and performing some of their own original works. Now, I don't know if that's exactly how the concert this year is going to work, but I can guarantee you it's going to be amazing, beautiful music. So that's Saturday. I think it's at the Park View Community Center. If anyone knows where that is, we'll be sending out official information about that. I just can't remember the exact address, but Saturday, I think it's 7. What's that? Yes, Northern Lights Folk Club. So this is a joint presentation by the Northern Lights Folk Club as well. So hopefully someone will come to that. And thank you all for coming. I'm gonna go turn the piece back on.
Okay.
I think I just need to hit the X's.
Just the one metro at the top
The one metro at the top.
should do it.
So I'm gonna, and I also turned off DSP, so I'll turn
Oh,
it
yeah.
on.
Yeah,
hit the
yeah.
Switch, hopefully sound will begin, and then I'm gonna cut some pieces off of donuts for anybody who wants them. So just
Yeah.
stick around. And thank you
Yeah.
for coming. And
Thank you. And I also want to just one more time say thank you so much to Marilyn Oliver, who has done so much to make my visit here possible, and to Scott and to Tom for his help with all the technical aspects of things. And thanks everybody for coming. Let's actually chat now.